do appreciate you guys coming out and giving the feedback. I'm not going to talk too much. Obviously, communications is important with everything we do. And when you talk about different generations, there's always been this sense that the next generation doesn't really get the previous one and vice versa. And you have examples, just different thought processes. My daughter changes jobs about 3 times a year. And that's normal. She's 36. I think she's had 22 jobs now, literally. And she'll quit without the next one. And again, that's part of her generation and culture. And it's the way people behave. So as we relate to different people with different generations, it can cause, friction. In fact, the book, which our guest Chris wrote, is called Why I Find You Irritating, Intergenerational Friction at Work. And what it talks about is exactly that. So this evening, we appreciate you all coming out. Our guest is Chris DeSantis, and I'm going to let him introduce. Yes. Chris has spoken about these topics for more than 38 years. He's an author, consultant, podcaster, and with that brief introduction, before something else dies, I'm going to introduce Chris DeSantis.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, hold the applause till the end if you're still here. I'm sorry we had to get a little late here. The technology, we had to find young people to fix all that, so that works, right? So I'll speak at a clip here. I know I will try to compress some of the information, but I'll move along at a clip. I'll be around right at the end if you have questions for me. But I'd like to start off with this quote, because, by the way the room is acoustically designed and all of the visuals will be over here, I'll be over here. So this quote really explains what I'll be doing is, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. You see, each of us looks at the world through the lens of how we were raised. And the way we were raised shapes our interpretations of the actions of others. And that's why, as was indicated, we are often irritated with them because they are not acting in a way as I would act. Now, before I get to that, I thought I'd show you a headline or two. I thought this was interesting. Right? I thought that was good. All right, let me show you another headline. Millennials are killing the napkin industry. Now, what do these headlines have in common? I'll tell you what they have in common. They're both gross generalizations that actually don't represent the groups they're talking about. But we start to associate that. You see, I'll tell you, where the Florida man comes from? You know where that comes from? If you're arrested in Florida, they publicize your arrest. And then news organizations troll the arrest records looking for the most ridiculous arrests in Florida. Now we start to have an association between Florida man and stupid. So in that sense, I'm not sure if that's accurate. But having said that, the millennials, do we have any millennials in the room? Do we have any of you? I know we do. Yes. You have been getting grief for 20 years of grief. The beauty of headlines it's about what is sort of the bad news of something, right? We don't see good news headlines because that's boring. But we see bad news headlines, and they've been featured for 20 years. And because of that, it starts to sort of plant a seed, like maybe that's true, maybe that's true. And I'll be talking about that, but this is the book that was alluded to. I wrote this book in 22, and I've just put it out here. I'm going to talk about the front end of the book. And the front end of the book, because my focus is workplaces. But I will tell you this, at the conclusion of this, you'll think of your families a little differently because I'm going to talk about parental models. Okay, well, let me start with this notion. The first thing I want to talk about is I'm generalizing. I'm generalizing about groups. You see, these are groups. Now, but you're never faced with groups necessarily. You're faced with the individual in front of you. But we tend to generalize, and that comes from a thing called the Dunbar number. The Dunbar number is really, it comes from a man named Robin Dunbar. And for the first 100,000 years of our existence as humans, what we would do, we were in groups about this size. This is the largest group you'd ever be in. So we're designed for small groups. We are tribal by design. That's our nature. The other thing about us is, since we were always in a small group, we're also designed to survive and detect threat. And so that is the arrival of somebody who's not in our group, which I'll be talking about. And what we do is, because there was no longer 150 of us, there's 9 billion of us, as it were, we use what are called heuristics. You know what heuristics are? The probabilities of who you are having a conversation with. You know, when you look at somebody, you sort of look them up and down, you say, what are they wearing? How are they dressed? Where are they in terms of where we are and how should they look? We make guesses about them. That's what we do. We have to guess, because I don't know this person. I just make some assumptions about this person in front of me. And by the way, I think I'm right. This is called the confirmation bias. We all think we read people well. Has anyone ever heard that? Boy, I'm really good with reading people. No, you're not. No, you're not. No, you're not. You think you're good at that, but confirmation bias is, look, I got to use a shortcut. I pretty much think I'm right, and then what I do is I look for some anecdotal evidence of being right. You see, when I think I'm right about somebody, and one or two of you do what I thought you would do because of what I assume about you, and I see it, it must be true of all of you. I'll give you an example. Here's one of the griefs that the young get. The young get is that they're very sensitive to feedback. Has anyone ever heard this? Let me make a point. All humans are sensitive to feedback. Our reaction to it is different than theirs. As a young person in the workplace, boomers in the room, as a young person in the workplace, when you receive feedback from your boss, did you discuss it? More than likely, you probably said, oh, thank you. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's helpful. It isn't. But you will say those things, right? And then you go down the hall and then you bitch about your boss. But you would never do that in your boss's presence because that wasn't how the game was played. Now what happens, these young people have the nerve to question my feedback. And they might say, I don't know if I agree with that, or I don't understand that, or tell me more. I don't read that as a dialogue. I read that as a challenge. And so now all I'm starting to see is, wow, they are sensitive. Now, it's not everyone who's sensitive. It just needs to be a few. You see, most people you give feedback to, or most people you talk to, they take it in. But every once in a while, somebody goes, I don't know if I agree with that, and I remember. That's a distortion of memory because it's not what I like about you. And so when I create this distortion with a number of you, I think it must be true of all of you. And that's what we do. We tend to look for the truth we already think we have, and we look for the evidence, and we don't actually find out if it's true or not. We just think it is, which brings us to conversational coordination. When I have a young person who I give feedback to and they don't like what I said, do I talk to them? No. You know what I do? I find another boomer, right? I go into their office, I close the door, and I say, what's going on with so-and-so? They're so sensitive. And they say, yeah, they sure are. That's conversational coordination. What you do is you find the person who already agrees with you so you don't have to explain the person you're talking about. And so what we do with that, and this is what happens, fundamental attribution error is, if I think this young person has a problem with feedback, I think this person has a problem in general. You see? I start to ascribe other things to them that are not true of them either. And that's one of the challenges with this because it becomes an obstacle between us. I'll make this point because one of the challenges is we have to talk to the young. They have to talk to us because I read an interesting book called Fractured. He said, and this is interesting, he's a British guy, but he's talking about Americans. He said, people over 60, less than 5% of us have relationships with somebody under 25 who is not related to us. And I'm not saying creepy, like relationship. I'm talking about, I know you as a person. We don't do that. We stay within our tribes. And when you stay within our tribe, we just have an echo chamber and we don't learn about the other. And so part of the whole point of this is getting past the tribe. But here's some other caveats. I'm going to talk about these groups. So I'm going to say, boomers in the room. Boomers, if you were anyone born between 44 and 64? 44 and 64. Okay, we're boomers. We're wonderful. I'm not biased. I'm objective. But I'm going to say some things about boomers. And some of you will say, hey, that's me. That's spot on. Others of you will say, that's not my story. That's not who I am. Because I don't know you again. I'm generalizing. But your story is a consequence of how you were raised. And if you were raised first generation U.S., you might have a very different storyline than the other kids. If your parents were a lot older or a lot younger than the other kids you hung around, you could have a very different storyline. Are there any only children in the room? Any only children? Oh, you're special. You're sitting together. You should all sit together. It's not so lonely then. It's not lonely. But when you're raised around adults all the time, you might have a very different view of things just based on that. And so you might have a bit of an old soul. My point is the story is what shapes you, but I judge you on what I see. So having said that then, the other one is about the culture. I get to talk. I've been all over Europe and parts. It's been great. Although I'm surprised I'm invited anywhere because this is a topic that is really American-centric in the sense that I'm going to talk about American boomers, American Gen Xers, and so forth, but you can't really extrapolate to the world. You can't say boomers in Europe are boomers here. You got to go through the similar socioeconomic things. You got to say, look, my life as a child, I went through what's called the Great Compression. All of you did. The Great Compression meant that we compressed everyone into the middle class. And that's why America was really great, because the middle class is what moves the country. So when you have this Great Compression, we had an experience that was unique to us. Now, that same experience didn't happen in Europe or South America, but when you get to the millennials, these millennials, when you get to them in the educated classes, in the middle classes in the United States, the middle classes in Europe, and the upper classes in Southeast Asia, when you get to these kids around the globe, they are, according to The Economist, they're the inception of the first transnational citizens. What that means is they're a class above. They recognize that competition is not local, it's global. And so they see the world a little differently. As a consequence of that, actually, the economists went on to say, and this is what I like about the young, they went on to say that they're the most competitive of all generations. I'm a boomer. I've always felt we were a lot more competitive than anybody. Because in my world, I win, you lose, it's a very good day. You know what I'm saying? I like that, right? In their world, they use competition from the Greek sense, which means strive together. They are far more inclined to be collaborative and succeed collectively as opposed just as individuals. That's going to reshape how we operate in the workplace. The last one here is that generational differences are not the same things as stages of life. This is where people get confused. I've heard this a lot. Oh, they're just young, they'll grow out of it. They'll become me. You see what I'm saying? In fact, when you work with people, you often think, well, that's just a younger version of me. It is not. It is not. We make some assumptions about that. But generational differences are such that it's the lens through which you see the world. Stages of life are the things we all go through. For instance, the old model, there used to be 4 stages of life. You're a child, a young adult, and an elder. Those are the 4 stages. Now, because we're elongating adolescence. In fact, anyone have children or grandchildren, children or grandchildren? Yeah. Your kids in this room, because you're middle class and above, your kids may live to 1 and 2 to 1 and 3 kids today will live to be over 100. They're going to be living a lot longer, and they're going to have careers that'll be a lot longer too. In fact, I'll talk about that, but they're going to be working in the workplace maybe between 50 and 60 years. I would say pace yourselves. That's what I would tell you all. But because of the elongation of adolescence, you know, it takes young people longer to contribute to society than it did when we were children. You see, when I was a boomer, at 18, I could make a contribution to society and get a job or not, or I go to school. They are not ready for that anymore. Now we've elongated that. Now also, we're living a lot longer in general, so there is now 6 stages of life. There's the child, the young adult, the emerging adult, that's the interesting crowd, the adult, the elder, and bonus elderhood. Bonus elderhood is 80 plus. So in that sense, but I'm interested in the emerging adult. Now, I've already established adults as boomers. When were we? 18, right? You made some decisions, right? You left the house. By the way, boomers in the room, when you left the house, what did they do with your room? Gone, right? Gone, right? Exactly. But these millennials, their room is a shrine to their return. That's what that is. That's what's going on there. So in that sense, that's fine. But we're gone. Okay. Now let me talk a little bit about Gen Xers just for a second. Gen Xers are typically, again, in the age grade, and this is just a marker, is about 1965 to about 1981 or 82. Who are you in the room? You're the most interesting of all of us. The invisible generation. Sad, tragic, I don't know. But you're interesting in that sense. When were you adults? I always ask this question. I typically get a range between 20 to 25. 20 to 20. And then you left the house. Sadly, nobody noticed you gone. You know, that's part of the problem. But what is the new adult? What is the new adult? 30 is the number. 30 is the number. Now, if I'm a millennial listening to this, or a Gen Z, you're going, wait a minute, I'm an adult. You're hearing adult through the lens, different lens. I'm talking about adult as a righthood in passage in society. You're hearing it through the lens of maturity. You see, I think the young are far more mature in terms of sophistication than I ever was. And I'll talk about that later on just because of the way they are engaged throughout their childhoods. But I'm talking about how we participate. And so these are the, it's not there. Oops, it's gone. Oh, well, I'll tell you about it anyway. I'll tell you about it. The big 5 are these things. You get married, you have a child, you are financially independent, you get a job, and you leave home. Those are the big 5 things we do to become a citizen. You know, sort of, those are the 5? Okay, the year in the United States, 1960. What is the percentage of young people by the time they were 30 that did these 5 things? Had a job, financial independence, left home, got married, and have children. What's the percentage? It's around 77%. 77%. Okay, now let's go 50 years later. 50 years later. Okay, it's so what is the percentage of young people by the time they're 30, have a job, financial independent, married, have kids, left home? What's the number? 20's high, 10 is closer, it's 13%. 13%. I know, they are just taking their time, right? Right? So, but let's talk about the list. Let's talk about the list. First of all, this notion of financial independence, how unfair. They owe the most money of any generation ever getting started. You see, they're highly educated, which costs them $1.5 trillion. Here's an interesting thing for boomers in the room. When we worked for a summer, we would have enough money saved to pay 1 year's tuition. That is an impossibility today. In fact, if any of you are involved in your alumni associations, I would say we've got to move away from a tuition model and we move into an annuity model. And the annuity is if I'm spending $200,000 at university, I can come back to this university as much as I want. And all you have to do is have video courses to allow me to do that, and I'll pay for the tests. Because there's no way one university is going to prepare you for the careers of the future. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So the other point here is that leaving home. Before the pandemic, about 1/3 of young people were at home, 30% between 18 and 30. By the way, what's interesting about that, you have very nice relationships with your children. You like them. You like them in a way that we never have liked. Boomers in the room, did you imagine ever moving back to your home, or Gen Xer moving back? Can you imagine? No. Do they know where you are now? I'm not even sure. But this is a very different kind of relationship, which is fine. Now, during the pandemic, it went up to 50% of young people were at home, meaning that's where they had to go. Now they want to get out of there again, but they can't afford to get out of there, mainly because of housing and what it costs to become who they want to be. Now, they're marrying much later as well. They're marrying, millennials are marrying around 29 to 30. Gen Z is marrying around 31 to 33. They're dating a little different. They're using technology. 40% of them have gotten their dates off of some kind of, swipe left, swipe right. They do a lot of swiping, I guess. But the point of that is they're using this to meet people, but this is the last time they experiment with meeting people. You know what they do? This is because of you parents. They will marry across any dimension but one. They'll marry across, they're interested in a wide variety of people. You could be different ethnicity, religions, I don't care. But this you have to be. What is it you have to be? The same socioeconomic category. We are doing what's called assortative mating. And this is the first time this has happened, and not the first time, millennials, now Gen Z. Assortative mating means they're willing to meet anyone in any category as long as you stay with the same economic area. And you know who did this? You did as parents. Because you started this a long time ago. You started vetting your children's friends. You started saying, hey, so who's that? Now, I'd like to meet your parents. And then you meet their parents, and then you decide, are their parents in the same economic rung as us? We can continue to have them as friends. You see, that was not her. Boomers in the room, your parents never bothered to meet they didn't care if you had friends, you know what I'm saying? They didn't care, right? You're on your own, kid, get out of the house, right? But this world this is ushered in, and so this selective quality, this is the challenge of the future. In my opinion, for the young, is the separation of their own generation into the haves and the have-nots. And here's the key. You want to get to the middle class? You got to know somebody in it. If you know somebody in the middle class, you got a better chance of getting there. You see, we boomers were all a product of the middle class. We lived on the same streets with lawyers and plumbers and doctors. Everyone was there. Now we don't do that anymore. We are much more balkanized ever. Now the other ones are, I said financial independence. What did I say? Babies. They're not having enough babies. They're not, this is not, by the way, that's a global phenomenon. As soon as you have money, you reduce the number of children you have for a number of factors around that, but because the resource allocation for children is so expensive. Oh, speaking of children though, do you love your kids? Just as an aside. Anybody? No, do you love your kids? Does anybody say that they love their kids? Yeah? How often? Every time you talk to them. That is such a normative answer now, right? Every time, which is weird, right? So, boomers in the room, just us boomers. Boomers, did your parents say they loved you every day? Oh, maybe once a year, dad's drunk, it's a holiday. You know what I'm saying? Here's what's interesting about that. The model has shifted, and this is important in terms of how we engage in the workplace. We've went from implicit, our parents loved us. They just never said it. It was a privilege to have anything, right? It was a privilege to have, so they loved us. It wasn't stated. Now we have gone to an explicit model where we assure them regularly. And I'm not telling you, go to work and tell your employees, I love you, there's going to be an email. You know, I'm suggesting, though, it never hurts to say to somebody what contributions they're making when they make them. You see, we don't do that normatively because that was not what the boomers would do, nor Gen X experienced at all. This new generation has experienced at home, and they want to bring it into the workplace. Okay, now, back to this notion of, because Randy alluded to this. He said this career thing. His daughter, actually, his daughter's not far off. Young people today will have anywhere between 15 and 20-some jobs. They're jobs, but they will have as many as 3 careers. This is different. I'm the last of the single arc career. You know what a single arc career is? You start somewhere, what Randy's doing. He started in the place he's at, and he's finishing the place he's at. That is a single arc career. That used to be what we did. That's what we did. Now we got rid of that. We got rid of the covenant. I call it the covenant is the promise between the employer and the employee that I will have a job here and there's loyalty. The new one is, now we'll have as many as 3 careers. There'll be an economic career where young people will master what they're good at. They're going to say, this is what I'm really good at. Then there's going to be an entrepreneurial career because so many young people are not only individualistic, but they are also entrepreneurial. And they're going to have this thing, what can I do? Then there's going to be a third career saying, now that I've been successful, what can I give back? So you're going to see multiple arcs. This will make you anxious because it is not you. You see what I'm saying? You will always say, oh my God, I'm worried about you. What they're doing though, and this is another book called Range, what they're actually doing is, what his daughter is doing, she's exploring what am I good at and what do I like to do as well. So good and what I like to do. This is, by the way, this is not a boomer concept. It's not a boomer concept, what am I good at, what I like to do. It's what you get to do and it pays the bills. You follow? And if you happen to fall in love with it, you're a lucky camper. But the reality was we did what we had to do. They're saying, no, what matches me? And eventually this match, it's called match quality. When these two align, eventually they find the thing that fits who they become. They are not only happier, but more productive. So you gotta be patient, is my point. We are not necessarily like that. Okay, let me talk about disappointment. Because we're all a disappointment. We're just not a disappointment at the same time. You see, that's the game here. Because, let me talk about disappointment. I'm missing a slide there as well. Another disappointment is, when I was a young person, I had long hair. I had hair. I mean, right? What a great day that was. But I lived in this little town in western Pennsylvania. Actually, you might know Sharpsville. Anybody know Sharpsville? Anybody? Yeah. I'm from Sharpsville. You know Sharpsville? And so I'm in this little town. My grandparents from Italy, and they thought I was a hippie. Now, there were hippies. There actually were hippies. I was at the tail end of the boomers, but there were hippies. I wasn't one of them. But it colored the view of my generation by their perspective, right? Because that's what they saw. They saw Woodstock and all these things. Now, we went past that. We were replaced by you Gen Xers. We called you slackers, right? Grunge people. I thought, what a surly crowd of young people. You know what I'm saying? I thought they were awful. Were they awful? Yeah, some of them were. But the reality was they're not that way anymore. Then they were replaced. And these young people back here we called the entitled, self-centered, narcissistic snowflakes, right? That's what we did. That's what we did. We just got name after name after name, and then we just look for some evidence of that, right? Because you know why? Because they have the gall to ask us for stuff. The gall to ask us for stuff. Because they, again, I will show you where that comes from, because they want to engage us in a conversation which we never had. Now they're going to be replaced. And we have a new generation coming on. This is the kids born after 1996, and they are called Gen Z. And they don't have a name yet. We haven't found a reason to be disappointed with them yet. But we will. We are clever people, and we will look for the signs. And some of the signs, I think, are, one of the things that they do that we don't do, they discuss their mental health. They talk about it. They're very free with saying, how do I feel? What am I feeling here? How this makes me anxious? All of these things they're sharing in a way we never have shared. And so we look at that and saying, what's wrong with you versus, hey, that's not a bad thing to talk about, because if you don't talk about it, you swallow it. So in that sense, we see that, and then we see them complaining if they see inequity. This is a very interesting thing about their generation. They want people to be treated well. They want that. And when they don't see it, they don't just stop to their boss and say, I don't like this. They go right to the top and say, what's going on here? We got to fix it. And we will look at that as saying, whoa, what's going on? I have a theory. I think we're going to call them something like sensitive or fragile, but we're going to give them a name that says, oh, look at you. Look at you. And so in that sense, we will find a way. Again, will it represent who they are? Absolutely not. Will we skew it against them? Absolutely. Let me I'll give you a point to make. I make this point because I'm going to talk about a work issue, which is a stupid issue. It's called work-life balance. First of all, no such thing. No such thing. We keep renaming it, right? Work-life options, work-life integration. There's just no such thing. But imagine, boomers in the room, boomers, you boomers, your first job, you're in your 20s, and you go to your boss and said, I'd like a little more work-life balance. What would your boss have said? There you go, you're fired. You got all day now, right? Right? Watch Days of Our Lives. So the point there is, we would have never asked that, because the carrot was, you do what you're told the way you do it, you got a shot here. That's how we play. Now, when the Gen X came along and they said, I'd like a little more work-life balance, we called them lazy, because they're slackers, right? And then when these millennials said it, we said, of course you want that. You're entitled. You want, here, how about a promotion? You're in the office. So, and that's, right? You see what the problem with all of this is? The problem with this is we're not listening to the message, we're accusing the messenger. And that's what we do. We don't listen to what's being said. We evaluate from the source, and then we make the decision regarding them based on that, which is terribly unfair, because the reality is work-life balance does not exist. It will never exist. What will exist, though, is the opportunity to do things that you find engaging. That's what you should design work for. You should say, and by the way, doesn't have to be brilliant. If you had 20% of your job that you get to do the thing you're really good at, you become very happy where you are. You don't have to be 100% happy. You just get to do some of the things you are particularly good at. And that's one of the things that they ask for. They ask for, let me do this, what I'm good at. And I would say, if it's relevant to what they need to do to succeed here, give them more of it. Okay, let me move off of that. These are the groups. These are the groups I normally talk about. Boomers, I guess this is our peak year for retirement. We used to be the largest generation, period, in the workplace. We are no longer that. There are now more Gen Z workers than there are boomer workers. We've just turned the corner on that. We're about 76 million of us. We're supposed to be retiring, which we do. A lot of us don't like to retire. We do not like that. There are a few of us who are called middle-essence boomers who want to continue working, because we are the most closely identified with work of any generation, And you know what the other generations have said? They said boomers have the best work ethic. You know what else they said? It costs too much to be you. Nobody wants to be us. Nobody wants to be, because we sacrificed for them. Now, the next generation, let me skip Gen X just for a minute, because everybody does, right? I just want to make you feel at home, because you've been ignored for 20 years, right? It's so interesting. You know how many books are written about you? One. One book is written about you. One book is written about you. But let me talk about millennials, because about 18 years ago, I was brought in to talk about this because the new young are different. The new young were acting differently. They were pushing back. Is anybody going to get that? Is anybody going to get that? They were pushing back. And so in that sense, this was an interesting phenomenon. I was running a school for new consultants. And everything was going great for years until this young people started coming, and they complained in large numbers. And I'm going, what are you complaining? You're not supposed to complain. And so I started doing homework, and so this is what they shook up the workplace. Now, they're further shaking up the workplace is Gen Z. Gen Z is just entering the workplace, but not in the numbers yet to make the impression to where we can decide what we don't like about them. But as I said, we will. Now, coming back to my favorite Gen X. Gen X is the best. You know it's going to be on your tombstone? Go along to get along. You know what I'm saying? Go along to get along. And then the other thing, you know what, I'll tell you, sadly, you're the only generation that was designed for the pandemic. You were designed for the pandemic. When the pandemic hit, you Gen Xers said, everyone's going, what are we going to do? Well, just go home and work. Go home and work. You know what you say? Figure it out. Figure it out. You know what you Gen Xers do? Remember we talked about conversational coordination? You know what you Gen Xers do when you go into somebody's office and talk about everybody else? You say everybody's needy. Everybody here is so needy. Needy. Like boomers. You know what we boomers like when we're back in the office? A good meeting. We should get everybody together. Let's have a meeting. Randy, you must have meetings, right? Randy has meetings, right? Let's get everybody together to talk. And by the way, you Gen Xers go to the meeting, but you don't want to talk because then it's a longer meeting, right? You're just, oh my God. Oh my God. Is this ever going to end? Come on. So you do leave that meeting, and then you try to find a place where you can have some privacy, except one of these young people find you, and then they want to talk to you and tell you about their weekend, who they're dating, and you're going, is there a point anywhere in your story, right? You just want to be left alone, because again, everyone around you is needy. The reality is boomers. We are collegial. Collegial means we like to know who you are, and we like to work with others in the same circumstances as us. That's how we build our networks, our friendships. This is who we are. And where the millennials are collaborative. I work better when I work on a team, when I work with people who have the same goal as I have, and I can share the experience with them. The point of that is you are more akin to an autonomous world, and they are more akin to a collective world. The beauty is Gen Z is an Echo X. They're coming into the workplace, and they're going to be more similar. What's interesting about generations is the biggest friction is between adjacency. We have the least affinity for the people right next to us. We have greater affinity for the people when we skip one. Boomers play well with millennials. Gen X plays well with Gen Z. You see how that, but next door, it's quite irritating. So, all right, there's that slide. Well, thanks, there it shows up. There's fragile. Now, let me talk about incongruence and parenting. I'm a product of what's called permissive authoritarianism. Permissive authoritarianism is dad was in charge. Anybody? Dad was in charge, right? And by the way, it was called permissive because our generation had Dr. Spock. And Dr. Spock recommended be nice to your children, right? But it was still a tell-do model, right? By the way, boomers, did any of you participate in the let's take a vacation discussions? No, right? Can you imagine saying, Dad, I think we should go to Disney World? You're not thinking, kid. You're not going anywhere, right? Get in the Vista Cruiser. By the way, pee before you leave. We're not stopping, right? Right? Oh, you want to watch a movie? Look out the window. It's all moving, right? That's how it was. You know why? Because it was Dad's money, and it was a privilege to get the vacation. That's who we were at home. Schools. Who was in charge of the school? The teacher. You got a note from the teacher, what happens to you? You're in trouble. You are in trouble. By the way, if a teacher gives a note today, we go after the teacher and say, you know nothing about my child. She's a genius, right? So in that sense, then we came to work. Every boomer here who went to work lived under the same model. And we were stupid enough to say, why are we doing that? What did the boss say? Because I said so. Discussion is over. You see what that is? That's congruence. We never had to change any aspect of who we are in any circumstances of our lives. The sad news is any boomers in charge right now, nobody seems to be listening. You know what I'm saying? So, now, here's where it changes a little bit. This is an interesting model. This is an elegant term. It's from a book called Unequal Childhoods. It's called natural growth. A natural growth model is the latchkey kid. You Gen Xers grew up in very different circumstances. You had different circumstances in the sense that your parents, their divorce rates were increased, fathers lost their jobs, mothers had to work, you're on your own, you're more independent. This is a suggest-do model because you have, and this gave you, by the way, this gave you sort of this desire to be more independent and more autonomous because it's your habit. It's your habit. So as a result of that, though, you in the school systems, they only change fractionally. That means you're allowed to challenge the teacher. But it was society that was changing because you saw things in society because you're the last kids to watch unfiltered TV and you watched Vietnam and you had to figure out what's going on here. Some of you saw Nixon, what's going on with that. And you're saying, how do we trust authority? You are very skeptical of authority, yet you had to work. And then you had to come into the workplace and you accept that. But I'll tell you what's interesting about you. You did something that no other generation in the history of the world ever did. I'll give you my paycheck if you guess. History of the world. Time's up. Okay, any guesses? This is easy. It has to do with technology. I'll tell you, millennials do it too, and so do Gen Z. History of the world. This is unusual. It's so simple, but you won't guess it. You're the first generation in... Oh, you have a guess? Internet? No, we invented that. Hello. Pardon? The telephone? Oh, push button. No, that was us. No, that's us. No. You're the first generation in the history of the world to teach upward. All knowledge flows this way. All of a sudden, technology came along, and as Gen Xers, you had to show us. And you know what you did with that information? Instead of going to your boss and getting a promotion, you started a dot-com boom. And by the way, I'll make a point. This is going to happen again with Gen Z. They are going to do a similar thing, and they're going to start another revolution and be entrepreneurial. They're already doing it on their side hustles, but they're going to do it formally, and they're going to start another. AI will lift their boats. So now, here's where it gets ugly. Millennials are raised under what's called a beautiful model. It's called concerted cultivation. Concerted cultivation means there's a concerted effort on the part of parents to shape their child into something wonderful. You see, you are highly engaged. These boomers were highly engaged in shaping what kids' experiences have. What they have as experiences. For instance, anyone go on these road trips to colleges? Anybody doing any of that stuff? Right? Boomers, when you were young, did your parents go on the road trips to college? Are you kidding me? Get out of the house. There's your trip. Yeah. But the point of that is you start to shape that. You also start to shape what activities they are involved in. I already mentioned the vetting of the friends. The point of this concerted effort to make a wonderful person. By the way, you were successful. They are the most civilized of all the generations. They are reasonable. They don't drink as much. They don't do as many drugs. They give back. They're socially responsible. They are lovely people. But they do not join stuff. We've gotten away from joining. We do not join anymore. It didn't start with them, but it started. And they are not as political. They are not, but that may change. So the point being is that is who they are. Now, the problem is the school system supported that through a collaborative model. Children in school are given individual learning plans, and they work collaboratively to solve problems, even evaluate each other's work. But the bad news of incongruence, they came into the workplace. This is a dialogue model. It's a dialogue model. And they came into the workplace, and they expect to have a dialogue with you, and the workplace is hierarchical, not flat. And so we see their dialogue as not incongruent with the experience that they're having, and that shapes them. Now, it moves on because this is a similar model. This is the most interesting model. You Gen X parents are quite brilliant. You use what's called an autonomy supportive model. Here's the distinction. The millennial model used on them was highly directive. They told the kid, you're going to go to these are things you got to do, these are things you got to achieve. This one is the Socratic model. They ask questions. They ask a lot of questions of the child, and that child, the beauty of this model is the child owns some of the decision. You see, that's the beauty. When you have a model that's autonomy supportive, it's saying, well, why are you thinking that? Well, what do you want to do? How does that help you? You help the child think through the decision. I'll give you an example. Are there cows? How far in the field are we, right? All right, so here's an example. Okay, I got these neighbors, Ben and Stella. At the time, they're 6 and 8. They live with their parents, so it's not weird. So they're little kids, right? I'm on the porch at their house with the parents, and Ben runs out crying his eyes out, like he's screaming, crying. And then Stella runs out behind him laughing, saying, Ben broke the iPad, Ben broke. Okay, so now the mother comes over, and now the drama unfolds, right? And she walks over to Ben and says, hey, Ben, what's going on here? Well, I was playing a game. What kind of game, Ben? Oh, a video game. What happened to the video game? I was losing. What did you do when you're losing, Ben? I got angry. What do you do when you get angry? I hit the screen. What happens? The screen broke. What are we going to do? We'll have to fix that. This went on for 30 minutes. I'm going, is anybody going to hit this kid? You know what I'm saying? I could take him down right now, fix this problem. It's only this big. But the point being, the meta point, as I observed it, was the child not only knew wrong, why it's wrong, what are we going to do about it, and here's the plan. You see what I'm saying? That's an arc. And that becomes the habit of how they engage. It's one of the reasons they want to know why. This is what's so crazy. In the workplace, when they come into the workplace, which is highly incongruent to them, they ask a lot of, why are we doing that? What's the purpose of this? Where does this fit in? That's what they want to know. I'm not a fan of the big P purpose. By the way, anytime you go to a college graduation, if somebody's saying, find your purpose, find your passion, boo the speaker. Boo the speaker. It's too early. It's too early. To tell a young person at 21 or so, find your purpose, they don't know who they are yet. And if we're going to elongate sort of adolescence, purpose only comes after you have a clear understanding of who you are. Our purpose comes later. Now, find your interests. I'm good with that. But the idea here is purpose, small purpose is what they want. They want to know when they come into work, what's the job? Where does it fit in? How do I do this well? I need your support. So those are the things they want. So incongruence is what they're experiencing. And if we just do what we do in the home, in the workplace, I think we'll overcome a lot of that. But we don't. We learn to manage from the generation that preceded us, and we're applying it to a generation that follows us, which now puts us at incongruence in how to engage them. What we should be doing is saying, how do I dialogue with you in a way that gets all these points? Okay, these are quick points about the generational lens. And I should, yes, I'm going to go, I'll wrap this up rather rapidly, but this is, you know your generation. This is, by the way, you can play this game anyway. Life cycle effects, where were you when you were a kid? Think about your age 6 to 10. Think at 6 to 10 years old. Where were you? What did you experience? And those start to leave, they become indelible. Because you're a sort of an open sieve when you're very young, and that's why you want to learn a language early in your life, because you take it all in. When you take it all in, you have to then take what's going on in the world I live in at that point in time. So these are the period effects. For instance, I remember, some of you remember this as well, landing on the moon. Remember how wonderful and glorious that was, right? These leave marks. I also remember Kennedy's assassination, Martin Luther King's assassination. Some of you remember the Challenger disaster. Kids will remember the 9/11. When you are in this formative age, those events start to leave an impression. And last and most important, who'd you hang around with? It's the kids you hung around with that really have the most impact on who you are. This is why parents who have been vetting their children's friends are shaping their children's behaviors, because they're around other kids who have the same expectations and the same, I will call, upbringing. So these kids become part of what becomes important to our group. And that then results in each of these groups. And I won't go through this, and I'll go quickly through one or two of these. My group, it was great to be us. Boomers, we had 35 years of plenty. That's what the Great Compression was. And these are a lot of events. Oh, by the way, we joined things. We were part of a wealth effect. We're a very righteous crowd. Here's the interesting thing about a boomer. You got to pick a side with us. There is no gray area. You're either on my side or you are not. We are about that, so pick that side. We're children of crowds. We are crowd people. But boomers in this room, when you were in the house as a little kid, what did your mother tell you to do? Go out and play. She didn't care where you went. She didn't want to know anything about it. Just go out and play, get out of my hair, because there were always kids in the neighborhood, and somebody's mother was somewhere nearby. That's what we did. We are the classic networkers. We also think everyone wants to climb the ladder, which the world is no longer about. We are children of the covenant. The covenant was if you work hard, you got a job for life. That fell apart when the Gen Xers came along. And so they came from a very different space. And so what's it like to be a Gen Xer? I think it's great. You're the last children in America to have a private life. Nobody knew where you, I'm your dad. I come home. I say, Gen X kid, what'd you do today? What'd you tell me? Nothing. Where'd you go? Nowhere. Who'd you see? Nobody. Apparently you're in the dark the whole time, right? You like your privacy. You not only like your privacy, the world is a very scary place to you. What was on your milk cartons, my young Gen Xers? Missy, there's your morning. This could be you. Have a nice day. Right? Do you remember your mascot, McGruff the crime dog? Anybody remember that? And remember what came on TV at 10 o'clock at night, every night before you went to bed? It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? Right? Your world is scary. In fact, you are very private. You are private as a consequence of being frightened. In fact, there's a duality to you. There's the public you that's warm enough, friendly enough, but the private you is much friendlier. And it takes a lot longer to know you. You only present aspects of who you are. When you meet a boomer, you meet the whole thing. When I meet you, I meet who you want me to see. And by the way, you have taught that to your own children. So, now let me go off of that. Oh, by the way, you're realists in the workplace. Everyone likes you as managers. You know why they like you as managers more than any other generation? You do not micromanage. You do not do that. But here's the deal. What you do is, here's the downside of this, you do not micromanage, but if they are not competent, you lose them. You do not tell them what they need to do better. You do not spend a lot of time with them. You move off and find somebody else. You look for competent people first. All right, now the millennials, lovely. You were raised in the bubble of love. You are the most wonderful generation. You were just, I remember remember I talked about Ben, when he was going outside, he'd have knee pads on, elbow pads, a helmet. It's a tricycle. I mean, how far can the kid fall? But the point is, he was attended to. These kids are attended to. I like to point out only one thing on that, and then I'll get to the other, but trophies. Now, let's be fair. Let me be fair to the young. No, remember that movie, Meet the Fockers? Anybody remember that line? 13th place. Not bad at all. That's a funny line. Anyway, the trophies. This is unfair. That's all part of the self-esteem movement, not created by children, created in California in communes in the 60s, that went to the 70s in school systems. And self-esteem movement is, all God's children are good. I need evidence of greatness. We never ask for evidence. But we give these poor kids trophies, and we blame them for accepting them. It was not them. They were foisted upon them. They're on to the game. By the way, I will tell you this. If you have young people working for you, initially, they like to hear when they're doing well. They need to hear that. And the more you tell them, the more you'll get repetition of that action. And the more they start to like and trust you. Because this newest generation, Gen Z, is the least trusting of all generations. Let me bring the last one here. Poise and the dinner table. This crowd and this crowd have wonderful poise. You know why? Because of the dinner table. I remember talking about Ben and Stella. I talked about Ben and Stella. The parents would say to me, hey, Chris, do you want to come over for dinner? Well, they were little kids, right? And I'm going, are Ben and Stella going to be there, right? And they said, yeah. And I'm thinking, there's just not enough booze in their house to make these kids interesting for a whole evening. Because what we did is we moved the child from the card table to the dining table, right? And now all of a sudden they're an equal player. She's telling the crayon in the nose. Stella, there's nothing going on in your story. I don't get it. So she does not know she's not interesting to me, but she thinks she gets to talk, and she does. Stella, here's interesting. She's 13 today, and she gave the eulogy at her uncle's funeral. It was brilliant. My point is, this is a gift. They have this presence and poise, but they're a bit of an unguided missile. And they need the guidance of somebody to say, let's shape that. They're not big on the politics of organizations, but all organizations have politics. The other thing is, they're not prepared to work. I'm not convinced that kids should go to college right after high school. I'm convinced, because of the side hustles, which 50% of them engage in, I think you should invest in that, let them do that for a year or two to find out what skills they really enjoy, and then put them to college. Because why waste the money on a guess when you have evidence if you can do something and find out what they're really good at? I also think we have to elevate, and this is just my opinion, trade schools. We have to elevate trade schools because they don't all want to go to college. And if we're going to have 3 careers, let them have one with their hands if that's what they choose. And then we'll go on to the others if they choose. So the point of this is, the other things about them, the side hustle, we used to call that a hobby. They call that an income. Because they don't have a great faith in our systems, in our social securities, and they got to say, I need a revenue stream. So they want what we want. They want to be happy, they want to be successful, they want to have good compensation, but they want somebody to care about them. One of the things about them, let me think if there's anything up here. Oh, the curated self. What's so interesting, they watch the failures of the millennials and putting all that information on the internet, and now they are very careful on how they present themselves, because this tracks with you for your life. I won't say anything else about them because I know my time. Before I wrap up, is there anything I could answer? Anything I could answer? Because I'm brilliant. No, I'm kidding. All right, then let me say this and then I'll let you go. Because I don't want you leaving here saying, oh yeah, she's a Gen Xer, this must be true about you. No, the only truth, your only truth is what's true about you personally. That could be the only truth that you know. But what we do with that is we take it and we use it as fodder for the conversation. You should talk to somebody and say, here's my story. It's called implicit reciprocity. Here's my story. I'm going to tell you about myself, how I was raised, what I value because of that. Tell me your story. What do you want? And that's how you bridge this, because ultimately we're going to find we have a lot more in common. They want what we want. But they might not want it the way we want it, or the way we phrase it, or how we see it, the way they see it, but we all want the same things. So in that sense, that's what you want to do. I will close with this. That is Ben and Stella, and so they are very lovely children. You've been very nice to me. Thank you very much for your patience tonight. Thank you. Thank you. Whew. Thank you very much.
Nice. Just like to thank you all for coming. If I do recommend the book, it's great. And if you'd like one, call the office. We'll get you one. Other than that, have a great evening.